Late for her divorce hearing, Patricia Williams rushed to the courthouse, disheveled and clutching a kitten. Little did she know that this moment would change everything. Discover how a dedicated teacher, facing the loss of everything she loved, unearthed shocking truths that turned her world upside down. Get ready for an emotional roller coaster. Patricia Williams jolted awake, her heart racing as she glanced at the alarm clock. 6:45 a.m. She'd overslept. Again. The weight of the day ahead pressed down on her chest as she scrambled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor.
"Bob! Sweetie, time to get up!"
she called out, her voice cracking with sleep and worry. As she hurried to the bathroom, Patricia caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Dark circles under her eyes, hair a tangled mess, a far cry from the put-together teacher she usually presented to the world. While brushing her teeth, Patricia's mind raced through her packed schedule. Class presentations in the morning, parent-teacher conferences at lunch, and then the divorce hearing. Her stomach churned at the thought. How had her life come to this? In the kitchen, she found Bob already up, his mop of brown hair sticking up in all directions as he poured himself a bowl of cereal. At 8 years old, he was becoming more independent every day, a fact that both pride and pained Patricia. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, his eyes still heavy with sleep. Patricia ruffled his hair affectionately. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you pack your backpack for school?" Bob nodded, his mouth full of cereal. Patricia busied herself making coffee, trying to ignore the empty chair at the table where John used to sit. The absence of her soon-to-be ex-husband hung in the air like a heavy cloud. As she sipped her coffee, Patricia's phone buzzed. A text from her lawyer. "Hearing at 2 p.m. Don't be late." Her hand trembled slightly as she set the mug down. Everything she'd worked for, everything she loved, it all hung in the balance of today's hearing. "Mom?" Bob's voice snapped her back to reality. "Are you okay?" Patricia forced a smile. "Of course, honey. Just thinking about all the exciting presentations we have at school today. Are you ready for yours?" Bob's face lit up. "Yeah, I practiced all week. Do you think Dad will come to see it?" The innocent question felt like a punch to Patricia's gut. I'm not sure, sweetie. Your dad's been very busy lately. But I'll be there, front and center, okay?" As they headed out the door, Patricia's gaze lingered on the family photo hanging in the hallway. It was taken just last year, all three of them smiling, happy. How quickly things had changed. She shook her head, pushing the memories aside. Today wasn't about the past. It was about securing their future. The elementary school buzzed with excitement as Patricia and Bob arrived. Children's laughter echoed through the halls, a stark contrast to the tension Patricia felt coiling inside her. She knelt down to Bob's level, straightening his collar. "Have a great day, sweetie. I'll see you at the presentation, okay?" Bob nodded, giving her a quick hug before darting off to join his friends. Patricia watched him go, her heart swelling with love and aching with the fear of losing him. In her classroom, Patricia threw herself into preparations for the day. She arranged chairs in a semicircle, set up the projector, and wrote encouraging messages on the whiteboard. Anything to keep her mind off the impending hearing. As her students filed in, their excited chatter filled the room. Patricia plastered on a smile, determined not to let her personal troubles affect her teaching. "Good morning, class," she said brightly. "Who's ready for our big presentations today?" A chorus of "me" rang out, accompanied by a few nervous giggles. Patricia's smile became genuine as she looked at their eager faces. This was why she loved teaching, the opportunity to inspire and nurture young minds. The presentations began, each student sharing their projects on My Hero. Patricia's chest swelled with pride as she watched them overcome their nerves and speak with passion about their chosen subjects. Parents trickled in and out, beaming at their children's accomplishments. Time seemed to fly by, and before Patricia knew it, it was almost noon. She glanced at the clock, a jolt of panic shooting through her. The hearing was in 2 hours, and she still had parent-teacher conferences to get through. As the last student finished their presentation, Patricia heard a commotion in the hallway. She stepped out to investigate and found Bob's class gathered around something on the floor. "Mrs. Williams!" one of the students called out. "Come quick! There's a kitten!" Patricia's brow furrowed as she made her way through the crowd. Sure enough, a tiny orange kitten was huddled in the corner, trembling and mewing pitifully. "Oh, you poor thing," Patricia murmured, carefully scooping up the kitten. It was so small, it fit in the palm of her hand. "How did you get in here?" Bob pushed his way to the front, his eyes wide with concern. "Can we keep it, Mom? Please." Patricia hesitated. The last thing she needed today was another complication. But as she looked into the kitten's frightened eyes, she felt a familiar surge of protectiveness. "We'll figure something out," she said softly, cradling the kitten close. "For now, let's get you somewhere safe." The parent-teacher conferences flew by in a blur. Patricia found herself constantly checking the clock, her anxiety mounting with each passing minute. The kitten, which she'd temporarily named Ginger, was safely ensconced in a box in her classroom, watched over by a rotating group of eager students. As the last parent left, Patricia glanced at her watch and felt her heart drop. 1:30 p.m. She had exactly 30 minutes to get to the courthouse across town. "Ms. Patterson," she called out to the teacher next door. "Can you watch my class for a few minutes? I have an urgent appointment." Her colleague nodded, and Patricia rushed to gather her things. She scooped up Ginger, unable to leave the helpless kitten behind, and dashed to her car. The traffic was brutal. Patricia's knuckles turned white as she gripped the steering wheel, willing the cars ahead to move faster. Ginger mewed softly from the passenger seat, as if sensing her distress. "It's okay," Patricia murmured, more to herself than the kitten. "We're going to make it. We have to." As she navigated through the congested streets, Patricia's mind wandered to John. She wondered if he was already at the courthouse, smirking with his lawyer, confident that he'd get everything he wanted. The thought made her blood boil. A horn blared, snapping Patricia back to attention. She'd nearly rear-ended the car in front of her. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to focus on the road. 1:55 p.m. Patricia finally pulled into the courthouse parking lot, her heart pounding. She grabbed her briefcase and, on impulse, tucked Ginger into her jacket pocket. The kitten's warmth against her chest was oddly comforting as she raced up the courthouse steps. Out of breath, Patricia burst through the courtroom doors at 2:03 p.m. All eyes turned to her as she stumbled in, disheveled and panting, with a tiny kitten head poking out of her jacket. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Williams, I presume? You're late." Patricia's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Your Honor. There was a situation at the school, and then the traffic." "Save your excuses," John's voice cut in, cold and dismissive. He sat at the plaintiff's table, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Patricia's monthly salary. Beside him, his lawyer smirked. As Patricia made her way to her seat, she caught sight of a woman in the gallery. Amanda, John's mistress, the woman who had torn apart her family. Patricia's grip tightened on Ginger, drawing strength from the kitten's presence. The judge cleared his throat. "Now that we're all here, let's begin. This is the case of Williams versus Williams, regarding the dissolution of marriage and custody of minor child, Robert Williams. Mr. Williams, you may present your case." As John's lawyer stood up, Patricia closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself for the battle ahead. Everything she loved was on the line. She couldn't afford to lose. The air in the courtroom crackled with tension as John's lawyer, a sharp-suited man with a predatory smile, began his opening statement. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. John Williams, is a devoted father and successful businessman who has been unfairly maligned by his soon-to-be ex-wife. We intend to prove that Mrs. Williams' erratic behavior and inability to manage her time make her an unsuitable primary caregiver for their son, Robert." Patricia's heart raced as she listened to the lawyer paint her as an incompetent mother. She glanced down at Ginger, who was now curled up contentedly in her lap, and took a deep breath to calm herself. Her own lawyer, Sarah Thompson, a kind-faced woman with steely eyes, stood up next. "Your Honor, what we have here is a clear case of gaslighting and emotional manipulation. Mrs. Williams has been a dedicated teacher and mother for years, balancing her career with her family responsibilities admirably. Mr. Williams, on the other hand, has shown a pattern of infidelity and neglect." As the lawyers traded barbs, Patricia's mind wandered to Bob. She imagined him back at school, probably worried about her absence. The thought of losing him made her chest tighten with fear. The judge's voice cut through her thoughts. "Mrs. Williams, please approach the stand." Patricia gently placed Ginger back in her jacket pocket and made her way to the witness stand. As she was sworn in, she caught John's eye. His face was a mask of cool indifference, but she could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. John's lawyer began his questioning, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "Mrs. Williams, can you explain why you were late to this very important hearing today?" Patricia took a deep breath. "I had student presentations this morning, Your Honor. As a teacher, I couldn't let my personal issues interfere with my students' big day. Then we found an abandoned kitten at school, and I couldn't just leave it there." The lawyer pounced. "So you're saying that your job and a stray animal were more important than this custody hearing?" "Objection," Sarah called out. "Argumentative. Sustained," the judge replied. "Rephrase your question, counselor." As the questioning continued, Patricia felt like she was walking a tightrope. Every answer seemed to be twisted against her. When it was finally over, she returned to her seat, feeling drained. Next, it was John's turn to take the stand. Patricia watched as he charmed the courtroom with his smooth talking and well-rehearsed answers. It was the same charm that had once swept her off her feet, now being used against her. As the hearing dragged on, Patricia felt her hopes dwindling. John's polished performance seemed to be swaying the judge. During a brief recess, she stepped out into the hallway, needing a moment to collect herself. To her surprise, she found Robert, the school janitor, waiting outside the courtroom. His weathered face creased with concern as he approached her. "Mrs. Williams," he said softly, "I hope you don't mind me being here. I overheard about your hearing and, well, I thought you could use some support." Patricia felt a lump form in her throat at his kindness. "Thank you, Robert. That means a lot." Robert shifted uncomfortably, then leaned in closer. "There's something else. I've been meaning to tell you. I've seen your husband around town with that woman, Amanda. They've been up to no good, planning something. I think you should know." Patricia's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Before Robert could elaborate, the bailiff called for everyone to return to the courtroom. Patricia's mind raced with this new information as she retook her seat. As the hearing resumed, Sarah called an unexpected witness, Oliver Reed, the new English teacher at Patricia's school. Patricia felt a flutter in her stomach as Oliver took the stand. She'd always found him kind and attractive, but had been too wrapped up in her divorce to think much of it. Oliver's testimony painted a picture of Patricia as a dedicated teacher and loving mother. His sincere admiration for her was evident in every word. "Mrs. Williams is the kind of teacher every school dreams of having," Oliver said, his voice warm with respect. "She goes above and beyond for her students, often staying late to help those who are struggling. And the way she talks about her son, it's clear that he's the center of her world." Patricia felt a warmth spreading through her chest at Oliver's words. For the first time since the hearing began, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. As the day wore on, the tide began to turn. Sarah skillfully presented evidence of John's infidelity and neglect, including text messages and credit card statements that showed his relationship with Amanda had begun long before the separation. The final blow came when Sarah called Amanda to the stand. Patricia watched in astonishment as the other woman's carefully crafted facade crumbled under questioning. "Ms. Cooper," Sarah began, her tone deceptively gentle, "can you tell the court about your relationship with Mr. Williams?" Amanda squirmed in her seat. "We're close friends." "Just friends?" Sarah pressed. "Then perhaps you can explain these text messages in which Mr. Williams promises to leave his wife for you once he secures custody of his son." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Patricia's eyes snapped to John, who had gone pale. She saw the moment he realized his carefully laid plans were unraveling. As Amanda stumbled through her answers, Patricia felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. She had suspected John's betrayal ran deeper than he'd admitted, but having it confirmed in such a public way was still painful. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "I think I've heard enough. We'll take a short recess, and then I'll deliver my ruling." In the hallway, Patricia found herself face to face with John. For a moment, they just stared at each other, years of shared history and broken trust hanging between them. "Patty," John began, his voice low and urgent, "we can still fix this. For Bob's sake." "No, John," Patricia interrupted, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "We can't. It's too late for that." As she turned away, she felt Ginger stir in her pocket. The kitten's soft purr reminded her that even in the darkest moments, there was still room for new beginnings. Back in the courtroom, Patricia sat with bated breath as the judge prepared to deliver his ruling. She thought of Bob, of her students, of the little kitten in her pocket. Whatever happened next, she knew she had to be strong for them. The judge cleared his throat. In the matter of Williams versus Williams, I've come to a decision. Patricia closed her eyes, her heart pounding as she waited to hear her fate. The courtroom fell silent as the judge's voice rang out, clear and authoritative. In the matter of Williams versus Williams, I've come to a decision. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, I hereby grant primary custody of Robert Williams to his mother, Patricia Williams. Patricia's breath caught in her throat. She barely registered the judge's continued speaking, outlining visitation rights and financial arrangements. Her eyes welled with tears of relief and joy. Furthermore, the judge continued, his tone stern. I find Mr. Williams' conduct throughout this process to be reprehensible. The court does not look kindly on attempts to manipulate custody proceedings for personal gain. John's face contorted with anger and disbelief. He leaned over to his lawyer, whispering furiously, but the damage was done. As the judge concluded the hearing, Patricia felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see Sarah, her lawyer, smiling warmly. Congratulations, Patricia, Sarah said softly. You did it. The reality of her victory slowly sank in. She had won. She would keep her son. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for months finally began to lift. As people started filing out of the courtroom, Patricia caught sight of Oliver. He gave her a thumbs up and a wide smile, mouthing, "Congratulations!" She felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with the stress of the day. Suddenly, John's voice cut through her moment of joy. "This isn't over, Patricia," he growled, his face inches from hers. "I'll appeal. I'll fight this every step of the way. You haven't heard the last of me." Before Patricia could respond, a firm hand gripped John's shoulder, pulling him back. It was Robert, the janitor, his usually kind face set in a hard expression. "That's enough, Mr. Williams," Robert said firmly. "I think you've done enough damage for one day." As John was led away by his lawyer, Patricia turned to Robert with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." Robert nodded, a hint of a smile on his weathered face. "You're a good person, Mrs. Williams. You deserve better than what he put you through." With a final congratulatory pat on her arm, Robert left, leaving Patricia to absorb the whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. The days following the hearing passed in a blur of relief and readjustment. Patricia threw herself into creating a stable, loving environment for Bob, determined to minimize the impact of the divorce on his young life. One sunny afternoon, as Patricia sat on the porch watching Bob play in the yard with Ginger, now a permanent member of their household, she heard a familiar voice. "Mrs. Williams, I hope I'm not intruding." She looked up to see Oliver standing at the gate, a hesitant smile on his face. Her heart skipped a beat. "Oliver, not at all, please come in," she said, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. As Oliver settled in, Patricia couldn't help but notice how at ease he seemed in their little domestic scene. Bob waved enthusiastically at him, and even Ginger trotted over to rub against his legs. "I wanted to see how you were doing," Oliver said, his voice warm with concern. The hearing was intense. Patricia nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "It was. But we're doing okay. Better than okay, actually." They fell into easy conversation, discussing everything from school gossip to favorite books. Patricia found herself laughing more than she had in months. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the yard, she realized she didn't want the moment to end. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" she asked impulsively. "It's nothing fancy, just spaghetti, but—" Oliver's face lit up. "I'd love to." As they moved into the kitchen, working side by side to prepare the meal, Patricia felt a warmth spreading through her chest. It wasn't just attraction, though that was certainly there. It was a sense of possibility, of a future brighter than she had dared to hope for in the dark days of her marriage's collapse. Weeks passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. Patricia found herself smiling more, laughing easier. Her relationship with Oliver blossomed, moving from friendship to something deeper with a natural ease that both thrilled and terrified her. But shadows from the past still lingered. John, true to his word, filed an appeal, forcing Patricia back into legal battles she had hoped were behind her. The stress began to take its toll, manifesting in sleepless nights and distracted days. One evening, as Patricia sat at her desk, poring over legal documents, she heard a soft knock at the door. It was Bob, his young face creased with worry. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, padding over to her side. Patricia's heart clenched. She had tried so hard to shield Bob from her struggles, but children always seemed to sense more than adults gave them credit for. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said, pulling him into a hug. "Just some grown-up stuff I need to take care of." Bob pulled back, his eyes serious. "Is it about Dad? Is he trying to take me away?" The directness of the question caught Patricia off guard. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of the promise she'd made to always be honest with her son. "Your dad. He's having a hard time accepting the judge's decision," she explained gently. "But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I will always fight for you. You're the most important person in my life, Bob." Bob nodded solemnly, then surprised her with his next words. "I like Mr. Reed. He makes you smile like you used to." Patricia felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "Oh? And how do you feel about that?" A mischievous grin spread across Bob's face. "I think it's cool. He knows all about dinosaurs and space, and he makes really good pancakes." Laughing, Patricia pulled Bob in for another hug, marveling at her son's resilience and wisdom beyond his years. As she held him close, she made a silent vow to herself. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them head-on, for Bob's sake and for her own. Later that night, as Patricia got ready for bed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who had stumbled into that courtroom months ago. She looked stronger, more confident, ready to write the next chapter of her life on her own terms. With a small smile, Patricia turned off the light and slipped into bed, Ginger curling up at her feet. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, she couldn't wait to see what it would bring. As autumn leaves began to fall, Patricia's life had found a new rhythm. Her days were filled with teaching, caring for Bob, and stolen moments with Oliver. But the specter of John's appeal still loomed, casting a shadow over her newfound happiness. One crisp Saturday morning, as Patricia was grading papers at her favorite coffee shop, a familiar face caught her eye. It was Amanda, John's former mistress, looking decidedly less polished than she had in court. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Patricia considered leaving. But something in Amanda's expression made her pause. Amanda approached hesitantly. "Patricia, can we talk?" Surprised by the lack of hostility in Amanda's voice, Patricia nodded. As Amanda sat down, Patricia noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the slight tremor in her hands. "I owe you an apology," Amanda began, her voice barely above a whisper. "What John and I did, it was wrong. I thought I was in love, but I was just a pawn in his game." Patricia listened in stunned silence as Amanda unraveled a tale of manipulation and deceit. John, it seemed, had been playing a long game, using Amanda to create a narrative that would help him win custody of Bob. "He never intended to leave you for me," Amanda confessed, tears welling in her eyes. "It was all about control, and when things didn't go his way in court, he turned on me too." As Amanda spoke, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. John's erratic behavior, the inconsistencies in his story, it all made sense now. "Why are you telling me this?" Patricia asked, her mind reeling. Amanda took a deep breath. "Because I'm testifying in your favor at the appeal. It's time the truth came out." As Amanda left, Patricia sat back, overwhelmed by this unexpected turn of events. She pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over Oliver's number. But instead she found herself calling Sarah, her lawyer. This changed everything. The day of the appeal arrived, bringing with it a mix of anxiety and determination. Patricia stood outside the courthouse, taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. Oliver squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You've got this," he murmured. "We're all here for you." Indeed, as Patricia looked around, she saw a small army of supporters. Sarah, her steadfast lawyer. Robert, the kind-hearted janitor. Even some of her students' parents had shown up to offer their support. As they entered the courtroom, Patricia caught sight of John. He looked haggard, the confident facade he'd worn during the initial hearing now crumbling at the edges. When he saw Amanda enter and take a seat on Patricia's side, his face contorted with rage. The proceedings began, and Patricia listened as Sarah masterfully presented their case. This time, armed with Amanda's testimony and additional evidence of John's manipulations, their position was stronger than ever. When it was John's turn to speak, his usual charm was nowhere to be found. He stumbled through his statements, contradicting himself and growing increasingly agitated. Finally, the judge called Amanda to the stand. As she recounted the full extent of John's deceptions, Patricia watched her ex-husband's face. She saw the moment he realized it was over, his shoulders sagging in defeat. In the end, the judge's decision was swift and unequivocal. Not only was Patricia's custody of Bob upheld, but John's visitation rights were severely restricted pending a full investigation into his conduct. As the courtroom erupted in muted cheers, Patricia felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It was finally over. She had won. Not just custody of her son, but her freedom from John's manipulations. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by her supporters, Patricia felt lighter than she had in years. Oliver pulled her into a warm embrace, and over his shoulder, she saw Bob running towards them, his face split in a wide grin. "Mom, did we win?" he called out. Patricia knelt down, opening her arms to her son. "Yes, sweetheart, we won, and now we can start our new life together." The sound of laughter filled the backyard as friends and family gathered to celebrate Bob's 9th birthday. Patricia watched from the porch, a content smile on her face, as her son excitedly showed off his new bicycle to his friends. Oliver appeared beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Patricia leaned into him, marveling at how natural it felt. "Just thinking about how much has changed in a year," she replied. "How much better things are." And indeed, life had taken a decidedly positive turn. John, facing legal consequences for his actions, had moved out of state. While it had been hard for Bob at first, regular therapy sessions and the stable, loving environment Patricia and Oliver provided had helped him adjust. Patricia's career was flourishing too. She'd been nominated for Teacher of the Year, her innovative teaching methods gaining recognition beyond just her school. As for her relationship with Oliver, it had grown stronger with each passing day. They had taken things slow, mindful of Bob's feelings, but there was no denying the deep connection between them. "Have you thought more about what we discussed?" Oliver asked softly, pulling Patricia from her reverie. She nodded, her heart fluttering. Just last week, Oliver had broached the subject of marriage. Not a proposal, not yet, but a conversation about their future together. "I have," Patricia replied, turning to face him. "And I think I'm ready. If you are..." Oliver's face lit up with joy. He pulled her close, their foreheads touching. "I've been ready since the day I met you," he whispered. As they shared a tender kiss, Patricia heard Bob calling out to them. "Mom! Oliver! Come on! It's time for cake!" Hand in hand, they joined the party, surrounded by the warmth of friends and family. As Patricia watched Bob blow out his candles, making a wish with all his might, she made a silent wish of her own. Not for anything to change, but for the happiness and love she felt in this moment to continue, to grow, to flourish. Looking around at the smiling faces, at Oliver by her side, and at Bob, her beautiful, resilient son, Patricia knew that no matter what challenges the future might hold, they would face them together. This was her happily ever after, not perfect, but real and beautiful in its own way. And as the summer sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the gathering, Patricia Williams knew that the best was yet to come. What did you think of Patricia's story? Please leave a comment with your opinion. 2 buttons will appear next to it. One to subscribe, if you haven't already, and another to watch other exciting stories. Make your choice. Thanks for watching this far. See you soon.